Victoria Collins didn't even bother lowering her voice. "If this is the standard Ashcroft Academy has fallen to," she said, looking Naomi Bennett up and down, "perhaps parents should stop paying £20,000 a year in tuition." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the room. More than 100 parents turned to stare. Naomi stood quietly at the front of the Year 10 classroom, clutching a folder of student reports. She wore a navy cardigan over a crisp white blouse, tailored black trousers, and sensible black flats still damp from the October rain. To Victoria, she looked nothing like the polished teachers featured in the school's prospectus. She looked ordinary. Victoria folded her arms. "I asked to speak to my son's English teacher," she said sharply. "Not someone who looks like she's wandered in from the public library." The laughter grew louder. Near the doorway, head teacher Richard Clark closed his eyes for the briefest moment. He knew something every parent in that room did not. By 9 o'clock the following morning, Ashcroft Academy would legally belong to the woman they were laughing at. And there was nothing any of them could do to change it. The rain had settled over South London since late afternoon, leaving the streets of Dulwich glistening beneath amber street lamps. Parents hurried through the iron gates of Ashcroft Academy, umbrellas battling the wind as they made their way towards the Victorian red brick buildings that had educated generations of London's brightest pupils. Parents' Evening was one of the most important dates in the autumn term. It was a chance to discuss GCSE progress, university ambitions, predicted grades, and the future every parent believed they were paying for. Luxury cars lined the road outside. A black Range Rover. A silver Mercedes. A dark blue BMW. Many of the families at Ashcroft had chosen the school not simply for its academic reputation, but for the doors they believed it would open. Few realized those doors were quietly closing. Behind the polished corridors and immaculate playing fields, Ashcroft Academy was facing the worst financial crisis in its 118-year history. The governors had exhausted every option. Staff knew budgets had been tightened. Teachers noticed resources disappearing. But only 3 people knew the whole truth. The school had already been sold. The contracts had been signed 2 days earlier. The public announcement was scheduled for Monday morning. Until then, absolute secrecy was essential. Naomi Bennett arrived on foot. She preferred walking the last few streets from the station. It helped her clear her mind. She paused outside the school's wrought iron gates, looking up at the stone building silhouetted against the grey evening sky. Children deserved places like this. Safe. Ambitious. Full of possibility. That belief had guided every major decision she'd made over the last decade, including one that would change Ashcroft Academy forever. She adjusted the strap of her worn leather satchel and stepped inside. No designer handbag. No expensive jewelry. Just a silver watch her late grandmother had given her after university. The receptionist smiled warmly. "Good evening. You must be Ms. Bennett." "I am. I'm Susan. Welcome to Ashcroft." "Thank you." Susan lowered her voice with a sympathetic smile. "Don't let Parents' Evening frighten you. Some of our parents can be rather passionate." Naomi smiled. "I've met passionate parents before." Susan laughed. "I somehow think you'll manage." Before she could say anything else, head teacher Richard Clark appeared from the corridor. He looked every one of his 61 years. Months of financial uncertainty had left deep lines around his eyes. Yet when he saw Naomi, genuine warmth softened his expression. "Ms. Bennett." "Good evening, Mr. Clark." He offered his hand. "It's good to have you here. And it's good to finally be here." For a brief moment, neither spoke. Both understood they were sharing a secret that could not yet be revealed. Richard quietly said, "I wish I could introduce you properly." Naomi gave a reassuring smile. "You will. Soon." "Yes," she replied. "Soon." Neither mentioned the confidential documents locked in his office safe. Neither mentioned Monday morning. Instead, Richard led her towards the English department. As they walked through the corridor, Naomi slowed beside a display board filled with handwritten postcards from pupils. "I want to become a doctor. I want to build aeroplanes. I want to study at Oxford." One card caught her attention. It simply read, "I wish one teacher would believe I can do more." Naomi gently smiled. Sometimes, she thought, changing a school began with believing in a single child. She had no idea that before the evening was over, an entire room of adults would judge her before they ever gave her the chance to teach. Richard Clark waited until the last parent had disappeared down the corridor before quietly closing the classroom door. The laughter that had echoed through the room only moments earlier still lingered in the silence. "I'm terribly sorry," he said, rubbing a hand across his forehead. "Victoria Collins has always believed money gives her permission to speak however she pleases." Naomi calmly gathered the remaining progress reports into neat piles. She was worried about her son's education. Richard looked at her in disbelief. "She insulted you in front of half the school." Naomi smiled gently. "Those are two different things." He sighed. "I should have stepped in." "You couldn't." "No." He lowered his voice. "Because if I defended you too strongly, people would have started asking questions I can't answer until Monday." Naomi nodded. "The agreement has to remain confidential." "I'm afraid so." Richard glanced through the glass panel in the classroom door before speaking again. "The solicitors confirmed everything this afternoon. At 9 o'clock Monday morning, Ashcroft Academy officially becomes part of the Bennett Education Trust." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, cleaners pushed their trolleys through the corridor while the rain tapped steadily against the old Victorian windows. Richard looked at Naomi with genuine admiration. "I still don't understand why you're doing this. You've transformed schools across the country. You could have appointed a new head teacher. You could have sent consultants. You could have stayed behind the scenes. Instead," he looked around the classroom, "you're here marking Year 10 essays." Naomi picked up one exercise book and smiled at the untidy handwriting covering the page. "That's exactly why I'm here." Richard frowned. She closed the book. "You can't understand a school by reading financial reports. You understand it by walking its corridors, by sitting in its classrooms, by watching children when they think no one important is looking." Richard smiled. "You've always believed that." "I always will." 10 years earlier, Naomi Bennett had been standing in a very different school. The building had been neglected. Windows leaked. Teachers left almost every term. Pupils had stopped believing university was even possible. Government reports described the school as failing. Investors called it a lost cause. Naomi had ignored them all. She hadn't begun with expensive renovations. She hadn't started with glossy brochures. She had simply walked into classrooms. She learned every child's name. She spoke to dinner ladies, caretakers, teaching assistants, parents. Within 4 years, the school had become one of the most improved in Greater London. People called it remarkable. Naomi called it listening. That success had led to another school. Then another. Eventually, philanthropists approached her with a proposal. What if, one had asked, instead of fixing one school at a time, you created a trust that could rescue dozens? The Bennett Education Trust had been born. Its mission was simple: protect schools that still believed every child deserved opportunity, regardless of their background. Ashcroft Academy had become its newest challenge. Not because results were poor. Not because teachers lacked talent. But because years of financial pressure had pushed the school to the edge of collapse. The previous owners had quietly decided to sell. Several commercial education groups wanted the site. One property developer had even proposed replacing the sports field with luxury flats. Naomi had refused to let that happen. She didn't buy schools to make money. She bought futures. The following morning, Naomi arrived before 7. The corridors were silent except for the distant hum of the caretaker's vacuum cleaner. She loved schools before pupils arrived. There was something hopeful about empty classrooms waiting to be filled with possibility. As she prepared her first lesson, a movement outside caught her attention. A boy sat alone on a bench despite the cold. His blazer was neatly buttoned. His school tie perfectly straight. But his shoulders carried the weight of someone much older than 15. Naomi stepped outside. "You're here early." The boy looked up quickly. "Oh, sorry, miss." "You don't need to apologize. I'm Daniel Brooks." "I know. You do. I've been reading everyone's reports." He managed a faint smile. "My English grades probably stood out." "They did." Daniel's smile disappeared. "They're awful." "They're not. They're lower than they should be." He looked away. "I used to be good." "What changed?" For several seconds, he said nothing. Then quietly answered, "My dad." Naomi waited. "He died nearly 2 years ago." "I'm sorry. Mum says I should be over it by now. But sometimes I still hear his voice." He loved books. "We used to read every Saturday." His eyes remained fixed on the ground. "Now I open one and..." He shrugged. "I can't concentrate." Naomi sat beside him on the wooden bench. "You know something." "What?" "Grief doesn't follow school timetables." Daniel looked at her. "No one has ever said that before. Because everyone expects young people to recover on adult schedules." He swallowed hard. "My teachers think I'm lazy." "I don't." "How can you know?" "Because lazy pupils don't arrive at school an hour early." For the first time, Daniel laughed. A genuine laugh. Small. But real. The bell echoed across the grounds. Students began streaming through the gates. Naomi stood. "Walk with me." As they entered the building together, several pupils noticed. Some whispered. Others simply smiled. Within a single conversation, Naomi had done something no timetable could measure. She had made one child feel seen. By the end of her first week, little changes had begun appearing across Ashcroft Academy. Students who hated reading stayed behind after lessons to discuss novels. The library, usually half empty, suddenly became busy after school. Teachers discovered pupils handing in homework that was not only complete but thoughtful. Emily Foster, the head of English, couldn't understand it. During Friday lunch she found Naomi arranging books in the library. "I have to ask," Emily said. "What exactly are you doing?" Naomi looked up. "Putting books back on shelves." Emily laughed. "You know that's not what I mean. My Year 11 class actually argued over who could read Macbeth aloud this morning." They've never argued about Shakespeare before. Naomi smiled. Stories become interesting when children believe they belong inside them. Emily folded her arms thoughtfully. Where did you teach before coming here? Naomi paused for just a second. In several places. Emily waited for more. None came. You speak as though you've spent years transforming schools. Naomi simply smiled. I've been fortunate enough to learn from some remarkable people. Emily walked away smiling. She still didn't know exactly who Naomi Bennett was. But she knew one thing. Ashcroft Academy had changed the moment the quiet new teacher walked through its doors. And somewhere else in the building, Victoria Collins was already drafting an email to the governors. By Monday morning, she intended to make sure Naomi Bennett never taught another lesson at Ashcroft Academy. The email arrived in Richard Clark's inbox at precisely 7:18 on Monday morning. Its subject line read, "Formal complaint regarding Ms. Naomi Bennett." He stared at the screen for several seconds before opening it. By the time he reached the final paragraph, another email had appeared. Then another. And another. Within 30 minutes, 12 parents had written to the head teacher demanding that Ashcroft Academy reconsider the appointment of its newest English teacher. Some questioned her experience. Others criticized her appearance. One parent claimed the school standards were slipping at an alarming rate. None of them complained about her teaching. Most had never even stepped inside her classroom. Richard leaned back in his chair and sighed. He had spent more than 3 decades in education. He had seen schools survive funding cuts, inspection failures, and leadership changes. But nothing disappointed him more than watching adults judge a teacher before giving her a chance. He glanced at the locked drawer containing the signed ownership documents. 48 hours. That was all he needed. 48 more hours. Across the corridor, Naomi was completely unaware of the growing campaign against her. She stood before her Year 10 class, holding up a weathered copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. Instead of opening the book, she asked a simple question. Have you ever been judged before someone knew anything about you? The room fell silent. Several pupils exchanged uncertain glances. Daniel Brooks slowly raised his hand. People thought I stopped trying after my dad died. Naomi nodded gently. And did they ask why? He shook his head. No, miss. Another student spoke. My older brother got expelled from another school. So teachers expected me to be trouble too. A girl near the window quietly added. Everyone assumes I'm clever because I wear glasses. Laughter filled the classroom. Naomi smiled. Interesting. So all of you have experienced the same thing. Blank faces looked back at her. Being given a story you never wrote. The room became thoughtful. She placed the novel on her desk. Harper Lee understood that better than most writers. And by the end of this term, she smiled warmly. I think you will too. For the rest of the lesson, nobody looked at the clock. Even pupils who rarely volunteered joined the discussion. When the bell rang, several remained behind. Miss. One boy hesitated. I borrowed the book from the library. Can I keep reading after the chapter you gave us? Naomi's face brightened. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. Emily Foster watched all of it through the glass panel in the classroom door. She had intended to interrupt with a timetable question. Instead, she found herself listening. Not because Naomi was louder than other teachers. Quite the opposite. She never raised her voice. She simply made every pupil feel as though their opinion mattered. Later that afternoon, Emily walked into the staff room carrying 2 mugs of tea. She placed one in front of Naomi. I owe you an apology. Naomi looked up from the essay she was marking. For what? I assumed you were another enthusiastic teacher who'd lose heart after a few weeks. Naomi smiled. What changed your mind? Emily laughed softly. My Year 10 class actually argued because they wanted extra homework. Naomi raised an eyebrow. That is unusual. Unusual? Emily shook her head. It's practically a miracle. Both women laughed. Then Emily became serious. Where did you really learn to teach like that? Naomi paused. My grandmother. Emily looked surprised. She wasn't a teacher. What was she? A librarian. Emily smiled. That explains a great deal. Not everyone shared Emily's admiration. Victoria Collins sat at the head of the Parents' Association meeting that evening. Nearly 20 parents had gathered inside the school's conference room. Printed copies of the complaint emails lay neatly arranged across the table. Victoria folded her hands. I'm pleased so many of you responded. A father nodded. We're paying premium fees. We have every right to expect premium staff. Another mother added. I still don't understand why someone dressed so casually was employed. Someone else muttered. Exactly. Victoria allowed the conversation to build before speaking again. This isn't personal. It's about protecting Ashcroft's reputation. No one questioned her. She continued. I've already contacted several governors. Tomorrow, I'll formally request that Ms. Bennett's probationary appointment be terminated. Several parents nodded approvingly. Only one remained silent. His name was Michael Reeves. His daughter had recently transferred into Naomi's class. He slowly raised his hand. May I ask something? Victoria smiled politely. Of course. Has anyone here actually spoken to their child about Ms. Bennett's lessons? The room became quiet. Michael continued. My daughter hasn't stopped talking about English all week. She voluntarily put her phone away yesterday. He laughed. Because she wanted to finish reading. A few parents exchanged uncertain looks. Victoria answered quickly. Children often become excited by new teachers. That doesn't mean standards are acceptable. Michael wasn't convinced. Or perhaps? He looked around the table. We're judging someone too quickly. Victoria's smile disappeared. I think we know enough. Michael leaned back. I don't. Meanwhile, in another part of the building, the Board of Governors gathered behind closed doors. The atmosphere felt very different. Legal folders covered the polished oak table. Beside them sat copies of the acquisition agreement. The school secretary checked her watch. The solicitors have confirmed Wednesday morning. Richard nodded. Everything is ready. One governor smiled. I've been looking forward to seeing the parents' faces. Another chuckled. I'm more interested in seeing the staff's reaction. Richard looked toward the rain-speckled windows. They'll be surprised. But I hope they'll understand. The chair of governors closed the final folder. Naomi insisted on teaching before taking ownership. I still find that remarkable. Richard smiled. So do I. Most people in her position would have arrived with photographers, press releases, television interviews. Instead, he thought back to the woman quietly stacking books in the library. She wanted to understand the school before changing it. The chair nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps that's exactly why she's the right person. By Tuesday afternoon, the effects of Naomi's teaching had become impossible to ignore. The library had run out of spare copies of the novels she recommended. Homework completion in Year 10 had reached its highest level of the term. Attendance in her classes was perfect. Even pupils who usually disrupted lessons had begun arriving early. Richard received another report from the deputy head. "This can't be right," she said. "It is. Every behavior referral from Year 10 English has disappeared." Richard smiled quietly. "I thought it might." She looked puzzled. "What exactly is she doing?" Richard folded the report carefully. "The same thing extraordinary teachers have always done. Making children believe they matter." That evening, Daniel knocked gently on Naomi's classroom door. She was alone, marking essays beneath the warm glow of a desk lamp. "Come in." He stepped inside holding an envelope. "My mum asked me to give you this." Naomi opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. It simply read, "Thank you for giving my son back something grief had taken away." He smiled while talking about school for the first time in nearly 2 years. "I can never repay you for that." Naomi quietly folded the letter. For a brief moment, emotion filled her eyes. Then she looked at Daniel. "You've done all the hard work." He smiled shyly. "No, miss. You just believed I could." Outside the classroom window, the lights of Ashcroft Academy glowed against the dark London sky. Inside the head teacher's office, the official ownership documents waited for one final signature before the announcement. Down the corridor, Victoria Collins was preparing one last meeting with the governors, convinced she could still force Naomi Bennett out of the school. She had no idea. In less than 24 hours, she would walk into the assembly hall expecting to end Naomi's career. Only to discover she was about to meet the woman who now owned Ashcroft Academy. Wednesday morning arrived beneath a pale London sky. By 8:30, the assembly hall at Ashcroft Academy was filled with quiet conversations. Teachers sat together in the front rows. Governors occupied the seats nearest the stage. Parents invited to the special meeting whispered to one another, convinced they already knew what the announcement would be. Victoria Collins sat proudly in the front row, a leather folder resting neatly on her lap. Inside were copies of every complaint she had collected against Naomi Bennett. She leaned towards another parent and smiled. "I've been assured the governors will address our concerns this morning." The woman beside her nodded. "It's about time." Across the hall, Naomi stood near the stage, speaking softly with Daniel Brooks and a handful of Year 10 pupils. Daniel handed her a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. "I finished it, miss." Naomi smiled. "And?" He grinned. "I think Atticus Finch was right." She tilted her head. "About what?" "You never really understand a person until you see life from their point of view." Naomi's smile widened. "I couldn't have said it better myself." The bell sounded. Students settled into silence. Richard Clark stepped onto the stage. For a long moment, he simply looked across the hall that had been his second home for more than 30 years. When he finally spoke, his voice carried both pride and emotion. "Good morning. Many of you know that Ashcroft Academy has faced significant financial challenges over the past 2 years." A murmur spread through the room. Richard continued. "Our governors explored every possible avenue to protect this school, its staff and, most importantly, its pupils." Victoria straightened in her seat. She was certain she knew what came next. After many months of careful discussion, Richard said, "A decision was reached that secures the future of Ashcroft Academy for generations to come." The doors at the back of the hall opened. Two solicitors entered carrying slim leather document cases. Behind them walked the chair of governors. Every conversation stopped. The solicitors took their places beside the stage. One carefully removed a folder embossed with a silver seal. Richard stepped aside. Our chair of governors will now make a formal announcement. The chair adjusted her glasses before speaking. It gives me enormous pleasure to confirm that, as of 9 o'clock this morning, Ashcroft Academy officially becomes part of the Bennett Education Trust. Polite applause echoed around the hall. Most parents looked confused. The name meant little to them. The chair continued. The trust has rescued and transformed schools across Britain, ensuring that financial hardship never stands in the way of educational excellence. Victoria whispered to the parent beside her. I wonder who runs it. At that exact moment, one of the solicitors opened the folder. On behalf of the Bennett Education Trust. He paused. I am delighted to introduce the Trust's founder and the new owner of Ashcroft Academy. He turned towards the front row of teachers. Ms. Naomi Bennett. Silence. Not ordinary silence. The kind that steals the air from an entire room. Every head turned. Naomi quietly stood. She wasn't wearing anything different from the previous week. The same navy cardigan. The same white blouse. The same black trousers. The same sensible shoes. Only now, everyone saw her differently. Victoria's mouth fell open. No. The word escaped before she could stop it. Richard watched as disbelief swept across the hall. Emily Foster covered her mouth with both hands. Several teachers exchanged stunned looks. One governor smiled knowingly. Daniel looked from Naomi to the stage before whispering. I knew there was something special about her. Naomi walked calmly towards the podium. Each step seemed to echo through the silent hall. She accepted the folder from the solicitor before turning to face the audience. Victoria suddenly stood. This can't be right. The chair of governors answered gently. It is entirely correct, Mrs. Collins. But she's... Victoria stopped herself. She realized every word she had planned to say would only remind the room of how she had treated Naomi. Naomi looked at her. Not with triumph. Not with anger. Simply with quiet understanding. Victoria slowly lowered herself back into her seat. For the first time in years, she had nothing to say. Naomi stepped to the microphone. When I first visited Ashcroft Academy, she began, I saw far more than beautiful buildings and impressive examination results. I saw teachers who cared. I saw pupils full of potential. And I saw a school worth saving. She paused. But I also knew something else. If I arrived as the new owner, people would treat me differently. They would show me the school's polished surfaces. They would tell me what they thought I wanted to hear. So I asked for one simple thing. I wanted to spend time here as a teacher. The hall remained perfectly still. I wanted to know what it felt like to stand in a classroom. To mark exercise books. To encourage nervous pupils. To listen. Because schools are never transformed from boardrooms. They're transformed one child, and one teacher, at a time. Several members of staff quietly wiped away tears. Naomi looked towards Daniel. When adults believe in children, remarkable things happen. But children are always watching us. They notice how we treat one another. They notice whether we judge people by their kindness. Or by their appearance. Her eyes briefly met Victoria's. There was no accusation in them. Only compassion. I could stand here today and remind some people of words spoken about me. I could embarrass those who judged me before they knew me. But if I did that, she smiled gently, I'd be teaching our pupils exactly the wrong lesson. The room fell silent once again. So instead, I'd like to begin with forgiveness. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Naomi continued. Mrs. Collins. Victoria looked up slowly. I know how deeply you care about your son's education. I'd like to invite you to work with me. A ripple of surprise spread through the hall. The Bennett Education Trust is creating a new scholarship program for children whose families could never afford a school like this. I would be honored if you helped us ensure every child feels welcome here. Victoria stared at Naomi in disbelief. After everything she had said, after every complaint, after every insult, she was being offered a chance to help. Unable to speak, she simply nodded as tears rolled down her cheeks. Moments later, the entire assembly hall rose to its feet. Teachers, governors, parents, students. The applause continued for what felt like forever. Richard Clark smiled as he looked around the room. For the first time in years, Ashcroft Academy wasn't being held together by fear of failure. It was being united by hope. As the applause finally began to fade, Daniel quietly turned to the boy sitting beside him. I think we learned the most important lesson of the year today. His friend nodded. And it wasn't even in a classroom. Naomi looked across the hall one last time before smiling. The greatest education we can ever receive isn't learning how to succeed. It's learning how to see the value in people before the world tells us who they are. The hall erupted once more. The end. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been judged before someone truly knew who you were? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might encourage someone else who's going through the same thing. If you enjoy powerful stories of hidden identities, unexpected justice, and unforgettable life lessons, subscribe to Empire Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss a new cinematic story. And if this story reminded you that kindness is always more powerful than status, share it with someone you care about. Until next time, remember, the strongest people aren't those who prove others wrong, they're the ones who choose grace when they finally have the power to do otherwise.